أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسيق الذين اتقوا ربهم إلى الجنة زمرا حتى إذا جاءوها وفتحت أبوابها وقال لهم خزنتها سلام عليكم طبتم فادخلوها خالدين. وقالوا الحمد لله الذي صدقنا وعده وأورثنا الأرض نتبوأ من الجنة حيث نشاء فنعم أجر العاملين. وسيق الذين اتقوا ربهم إلى الجنة زمرا حتى إذا جاءوها وفتحت أبوابها وقال لهم خزنتها سلام عليكم طبتم فادخلوها خالدين. وقالوا الحمد لله الذي صدقنا وعده وأورثنا الأرض نتبوأ من الجنة حيث نشاء فنعم أجر العاملين. وترى الملائكة حافين من حول العرش يسبحون بحمد ربهم وقضي بينهم بالحق وقيل الحمد لله رب العالمين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Thank you all for joining us this evening for the first installment of our Sacred Door Project lecture series for this academic term, where we try to engage in conversations, again, always at the intersection between academia and community in some relation. So we bring on some of the best folks in their respective fields. Alhamdulillah, we're blessed with Dr. Noor Zaidi today, who's been a guest in the past a couple of years ago, but I was sick that day. So
I know, so this is the first time we're doing it
together. And again, for those of you who have not been to some of our past conversations, the idea is to sort of offer a unique take on something that is also practically beneficial for us as believers, but to engage in a conversation with a little bit more depth than maybe we would in a mosque setting or a mosque space, and again, bring on various different individuals, and also seek toward amplifying their respective voices from within our community. So super happy and blessed to have you all with us this evening, and thank you to Professor Zaidi for agreeing to meet with us or be with us this evening. Alhamdulillah. For those of you who are not familiar, we sent out her extensive biography, but I'll give a short one. Dr. Noor Zaidi is a historian of the Middle East and South the Middle East and South Asia, and a professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, specializing in the history of gender, sectarianism, and Shi'a Islam. Her book, Manuscript Traces of Zaynab, Daughters of Ali, Ritual, Memory, and Place in Shi'a Islam, draws on over a decade of fieldwork and research across 6 countries, some of that which we'll try to sort of take a little bit of a dive into today, inshallah. And most recently, she's been appointed as the inaugural fellow in Shi'a Studies at the Imam Ali Research Center in affiliation with Hartford International University. So, inshallah, today our focus of our conversation is going to be entitled Where the Sacred Meets the Social, whereby we navigate questions pertaining to sacred space. And again, I think that this conversation, if you have no idea what sacred space means, you're going to realize just how practical it is, because it's something that we engage almost on the daily, particularly members of the Shia community. And so with that, inshallah, we wanted to get started.
Wow.
Dr. Zaidi, again, her full biography, if you wanted to follow. But we wanted to start with a couple of questions. Do you want to go through them, or you want me to go through them?
You can go through them, and we can hopefully get everyone to engage with them.
Perfect. So let's start. Before we engage, or we sort of take a deeper dive into our conversation, firstly, what is the first phrase, or what do you hear when you hear the words sacred space? What are the first thoughts that comes to one of your respective minds? Yeah.
Like someplace that has like religious or spiritual meaning, like it could be like a holy site like there, or even just like a prayer space, like a university or a mosque.
Great. Yeah.
Place for Allah.
Place for God. Yeah.
Place for God.
Place for God, yeah. And please don't be shy, because part of this conversation is really unpacking what we think of when we think of sacred space, and like what makes sacred space. So we'd love to hear from a diverse range of viewpoints of what does that mean to you, before we sort of unpack what it means from an academic and religious perspective.
The Haram of the Shrines.
Okay. What makes a space sacred
in Surah Taha, where Prophet Musa is speaking to God, and he tells him, "You're in this sacred valley. I think Wadi Muqaddas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And take off your shoes." So this space that Musa happened to be in was sacred, right? Because God was there. So for me, I guess a space where God is, obviously he's omnipresent, right? But where he's remembered, or where he's, present in a different way. I don't know how else to put it.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that makes a space sacred.
Wait, okay. Yeah, go ahead, please. Oh, sorry, either.
It's okay, please. Ladies first. For me, it's a little corner in my house where I pray day after day after day for how many years. If I have sat there and prayed and connected to Allah like from my heart, I just find that place sacred also. Like there's a certain aura there
Mm-hmm.
that I feel.
Sure. Yeah.
I think for me, it's mainly when I get to see, like, experience Allah rather than see, like, with other religions, like Christianity or Judaism, you get certain symbols, you see God, like through Jesus or Christ. During a mosque, whenever I enter, I get to experience Allah through the light that reflects on the different objects that we see in the room, etc. That's why I think it's basically, in my opinion.
So we hear like a lot of like language around like experience or feeling. So what does it mean to, for you in a practical sense to feel sacred or to feel spiritual? And is spiritual something that is felt?
Peace of mind.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
I think for me it's like two things. One of them is like you have the intention to like be spiritual or like remember Allah, for example, and then the other thing is like for me it's like being around people that are also kind of in the same mindset. So like for me, an example would be like right here. Like I feel like I'm in a sacred space.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to say? Did you have your hand up? Oh, sorry.
It's one of the same answer as her actually. Yeah.
Okay.
And also, like, connecting back to the previous questions, connecting back to the previous questions, I think it's also some place I would feel grounded. It's like a place I need to respect. It doesn't have to be, like our religious places. When I just hear a sacred place, I just feel like I enter this place. I should concentrate on where I am, and I should feel grounded. I should respect the environment I'm in, and curate my thoughts and stuff like that.
So just before we take a deeper dive, if you don't mind,
Mm-hmm.
I want everyone to just sort of pause for a second and think for a moment. What is the moment that you felt like, hey, I just reached like a height in my spirituality? Time, place, moment, second, day, night, where, when, how? I assure you that those of you who've experienced this feeling likely can like explain it with a lot of attention to detail. Fair? Would anyone like to share? Yeah, see, that was quick.
I remember after Fajr, actually in Najaf, it was raining, but it was like a misty rain. And it was just the feeling of just completing prayer and just sitting there and feeling that on your skin and just, you're not sleeping much, you're getting little naps here and there, but you're still energized. You're still able to stand there and pray. So I think that's what came to mind for me.
Yeah. Muhammad.
I think the first time was actually seeing the chapel in person.
Yeah.
Even though it's just like cute, there are very different songs that really try to like connect you like a person with your creator.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
I think that I have that feeling like during Laylatul Qadr, it's such a great like spiritual connection. You just feel one, and no matter where you do it, you feel like you're just alone with God. It could be in masjid with like so many people. I was blessed last year to do it in Karbala. We were literally shoulder to shoulder squeezed, and it felt like I was alone. I was just alone with me and my Creator, and that was beautiful.
Mhm.
espantada. It was the only one there.
Yeah.
I feel like when you said like time, it's like those days of like the first 10 nights, like when like every night you're all wearing, everyone's wearing black, and it's like, you're where you're gonna be, and like just like being in those nights.
Yeah.
For me, it was Arafat during COVID. Went outside. It was hot, but there was something because we had been so isolated. And I looked up at the sky, and I remember that ayat of the sky is erected above us like a dome, and I felt like that's the dome of my
Mhm.
masjid right now. Is this moment? It was unlike anything.
So there are all of these moments, right? And within our tradition, and then I'll pass it to Dr. Zaidi, but within our tradition, we have like the strong emphasis on like days, Laylatul Qadr, right? For instance, Ramadan, first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, wal Fajri, wa layalin ashr. Allah swears by these 10 nights. 10 nights, according to some of our hadith literature, the last 10 nights of Ramadan, or the first 10 days of the month of Dhul Hijjah, or others have different opinions. Or we have places, right? So you have Mecca and Medina, and you have Najaf, and you have Karbala, and you have Mashhad, and whatever. Not whatever, but you have other historical sort of tied locations. Or we have the masjid, the mihrab, the Islamic center, the prayer room in your home, the prayer mat that we pray on, right? A graveyard, right? All of these things sort of invoke some sort of tie or some sort of connection to something deeper, and they're all of some sort of spiritual, sacred significance within our respective religious tradition. But the idea is that, are we actually tied to them in some sort of like, intrinsic spiritual way? And what does that even mean if that's the case? And I think that a lot of the conversation that we want to engage in today is seeking toward thinking about this subject through a little bit of a different lenses, so to say, in the hope that not only like are we intellectually sort of inspired in a lot of different ways to take a deeper dive within our own reflections, but also sort of on a practical sense, re-engage how we perceive terms like the sacred and like that of spiritual. So, Dr. Zaidi, I'll pass to you. In your work and in your research, you have studied and traveled and have sort of taken this deep dive into understanding the sacredness of particular spaces and places. And we'll talk about the Sayeda Zaynab shrine, or we'll talk about Wadi Salam, or we'll talk about shrines sort of more broadly within our tradition. But what does it mean to you, sacred space, from your purview, from your lens?
So, well, first of all, thank you all for being here. And it was really lovely to hear all of your different engagements with the idea of the sacred, because I should preface this by saying we're talking about sacred space, but I think even in that beginning conversation, there's a wide range of what people think of, right, when they say the sacred and what is sacred space. And for me, I come from a historian of religion and academic perspective. So when I describe to people what my book is about, and we always have to have the one sentence tagline, I tell people that my book that I have, alhamdulillah, just finished writing in the last couple of months, so is about how the bodies of women, both real and imagined, make sacred geography. So I think from that sentence, you might get a sense of the perspective that I come from as a historian of religion, which is the making of sacred space. And a lot of academics and historians of religion and scholars of religion who, kind of look at this from the academic perspective, really think about sacredness not necessarily always as something that is intrinsically or inherent in a space, but sacredness as a process of making, right? Of encountering, of contesting, of constructing, of engaging with and feeling, right? A lot of you, when we asked the question, you were sort of talking about when I feel this way, right? And it's sort of like your relational feeling with a space that is giving you that feeling of sacredness, right? So from a historian of religion perspective, that's really what I'm interested in, right? It's like, what makes the sacred? What are the different relationships, constructs, stories, rituals, emotions that help people engage with sacred space? So when I started writing my dissertation, now many, many years ago, there was a particular line by an anthropologist named Yasser Tabah, which I give at all these talks that I do, because he wrote an article about the making of the sacred at the Sayeda Ruqayya shrine in Damascus. So for those of you who might not be familiar with it, it's a shrine to the daughter of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, and it is in, I guess you would say, like the Umayyad court, right? It's in the prison where she passed away. Many South Asians know her as Bibi Sakina, right, or Sayeda Sakina. And that shrine, which, I think has a lot of meaning to people, right? And I think a lot of people who would go visit would say this is absolutely a sacred space for them, right? They feel that emotion. It symbolizes something. That shrine was almost non-existent until like the 1970s or the 1980s, right? Like it hadn't sort of been like quote unquote discovered. It was like a really nondescript place. It was not a place that a lot of people went to visit for ziyarat. And so Yasser Tabah asked this question of like, how did this shrine become so sacred, right? Was it always sacred and people just didn't go, and it wasn't like the center of ziyarah for people, or were there processes that made it more sacred, right? So he asked this question of how do Shia, and in this case he's talking about shrines, but we can also think about that in terms of spaces, right? How do spaces become sacred? Are there physical remains or pious or narrative tales, right? Or stories or historical evidence that makes these places sacred, right? And that's kind of really been how I've thought of sacred space. Like, what are the sort of factors that go into thinking about why this space is sacred? So I think from the Shia tradition, and I mean, I would welcome you to kind of join in, there are a few different things that we think of as like constituting sacred space, right? What makes this space sacred to us? I think a lot of us would say like the narrative, right? That this is a place that has some sort of narrative significance in the kind of way that we think of Shia theology and history, right? So in a lot of times it's narrative connection to the imams, right? Or the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or the family of the Prophet, right? So some places that we think of as sacred spaces, they have a story and a narrative connection to it. There are other places that historians of religion would say we make sacred through our ritual practice, right? So our practice in the space, right? What we do in the space, the emotions that we evoke and we give off and we engage with in the space, that makes a space sacred, right? So whether it be mourning or going for ziyarah or praying, right? Like some of you kind of mentioned, like my mom mentioned the room in your house where you pray and that becomes sacred, but or it could be where you said your Arafah dua, right? Or Laylatul Qadr, that a space becomes sacred because of your ritual engagement with it. Which should also tell you that, for historians, we don't always think of sacred spaces as permanent, right? Like there is a temporal quality. You can move in and out of sacred, right? So space is not permanent. Space is kind of constantly shifting. And then, I think a lot of people would say like, okay, for some sacred spaces, there is some sort of like community recognition, right? Or group recognition that this space embodies or has sacredness, right? That's another factor that lends it that. And I think in the Shia tradition there is that sort of sense of like a place having barakah, right? Whether it be a body or a presence. And so I think like if you think about the places that you think of as sacred space, and I think of the places that I've worked, actually they all have different ways in which they have become sacred for people. And I think that should tell us, there's not one, exact formula where we say like, okay, checks these boxes, so this place is sacred. And it is relational, right? That it is people's engagement with places that helps continue, contest, define, create the sacred.
So let me ask you a question before I jump in, because I think that this example that you've given of like the Sayeda Ruqayya shrine or the Sayeda Zaynab shrine that you have researched extensively, we have a lot of historical questions pertaining to their validity. And I know we're jumping a little bit further down the road, but nonetheless, because I'm sure it resonates. So if this is a shrine that we now have actualized or we have popularized in the last 50 or 60 years with regards to whether or not this woman, this lady, this girl has even been buried in this location.
Right.
Which the question of its reliability is, you know, we have a lot of doubt.
Right.
Right. And even like the burial place of Sayeda Zaynab, for
Right.
instance, or even, you know, other historical
places, right.
personalities. And yet we're still tying so much value to it from like a historiographical lens. From your perspective, you don't see this as a problem because the community has defined it as something in and of itself as.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, so, you know, because you kind of teed it up for me. So one of the places that I work on is the Sayeda Zaynab shrine in Damascus. And some of you, I imagine, are familiar with that shrine, right? So it's, you know, Shia Muslims believe largely that it is the shrine where the granddaughter of the Prophet, right, Imam Hussein's sister, was buried. And, you know, it's a shrine that has tremendous emotional weight for people, right? So obviously she's an incredibly important figure in the recent kind of geopolitics of the last few years, right? Because of the politics of Syria, it's also a shrine that's been really fraught, right? So you have people who are literally willing to go and die to defend the shrine, right? Or on the other side, you know, people who have sort of like engaged in active attacks against the shrine because for them, right, for both sides, the shrine actually means something. Most Shia scholars would kind of say, yes, we think our best guess is that she's buried at this shrine, right? But, you know, part of why I say like how the bodies of women help us define sacred geography is like one of the things that we just have to deal with is just much harder to know about the lives of women in the past. Right. And it's much harder to have certainty about these women who lived their lives also in seclusion largely, right? So it's harder to identify these women. So I can't give you, and you know, this also relates to another one of the shrines that I work on, but I can give you an example. So some of you, I imagine maybe nobody has heard of Sayyid Mohsen Al-Amin, who is a really, really, really famous, important Shia jurist who kind of lives in the 20th century, right? He's incredibly influential. He writes this Shia tract called Ayan al-Shia. He has many sort of relevant works in jurisprudence. And Sayyid Mohsen Al-Amin is a high-ranking Shia jurist, and he's probably one of the people who's most responsible for promoting the development of the Sayeda Zaynab shrine. But he himself actually is not convinced that she's buried there. So if you read his writings, he'll say, you know, like, we actually think that maybe like the most likely burial spot for her is in Medina. And there is a grave here, but it could be another Zainab, right? Because the other thing about the Prophet's family, there was a lot of Zainabs, Fatimas, Alis, Muhammad, right? So like this sort of, you know, historians always want to know things. Like we want to know the facts, and sometimes we just have to deal with like there are things we just won't know. So he says, you know, it's likely actually that she may not be buried there, but this is still an incredibly worthy site to promote for the Shia community in Damascus. Because it is a place, first of all, that has like nisba, like a connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a place where Shias can gather and engage in their rituals, right? It's a place where we remember Karbala, where people will pray and break their fast and engage with a sacred space. And so actually, it does not, there's no need for a scholar to tell you, don't go visit this place, just because we are not 100% sure that that body is there, because there are other things that, like I said right in the beginning, there are other things that make a place sacred for people. And so, you know, there's no need to invalidate this space. And so for me, you know, as a historian, obviously, like I work a lot on Sayeda Zaynab. Salam alayhi, she's an incredibly important figure in my life. It's really meaningful for me to go visit that shrine, and I have the same reaction as a lot of you, right? Like I have this emotional response to these places. I walk into the space and I feel like a connection to the divine. So then I ask myself, like, does it really matter does it change anything for anyone if I say, like, actually, she might not be buried there? Does it make a place less sacred? And I don't have the answer. Like, for me, the answer is no, it doesn't, right? Because I don't think that a body is the only thing that makes sacred space. And, you know, I think it can still be a really important place for the community. I think, you know, the imams in the Shia tradition have encouraged ziyarah as a means of community formation, right? To like reaffirm your identity, your commitment to the message. And so that can exist whether or not I'm, going to the place of a body. And we believe baraka it's not just about like a physical grave. So.
And I think we find this embedded within our like hadith literature as well.
Right.
You open up like a text like that of Kaman ziyarat. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work. Whenever I know some of you are coming with us for ziyarah next month, inshallah during the Thanksgiving break, and some of you have been in the past, but we're always sort of quoting from this text, right?
Right.
The reward of ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein is X or Y or Z. These are all founded within this popular sort of collection. And you find like traditions that tell us that, for instance, for the one who cannot make it to Karbala, it suffices if they go to the highest level in their home and they say Assalamu alaikum ya Abu Abdullah as they direct themselves to Karbala, meaning they face there. And if they don't know where Karbala is, then they face north and east and west and south, right? Or even other things like if the travel is too challenging because of Umayyad, Abbasid, political, social, whatever authoritative rule, then draw a box in the sand, and like recite your ziyarah and your salutations. So this notion of the actual physical space, as much as physical space is important within our tradition, and like making the physical pilgrimage. You can't do like Hajj from around Washington Square Park, make tawaf. Like it would be great, right? And I would charge a lot of money the same way that anyway.
As is parking for parking.
No, a lot more than that. It has to be in a physical space, but there's also still this notion of, again, nisba, right? You are attaching yourself in this metaphysical to the personality, and that in and of itself suffices. So when we say in the ziyarat, bi abi anta wa ummi wa nafsi wa mali, may my mother and my father and my wealth and my everything be in sacrifice for you, you're symbolically saying that, I've never met you and I've never seen you and but I am here at your service. There you go. And so there is this notion, undoubtedly as well. But I think this sort of begs another question then, right?
Can I just
interrupt? Please.
So I think obviously like the most obvious explanation of that or illustration is that we say the ziyarah, right? Ziyarah means visitation, but when we're reciting these words, it is also called a ziyarah, right? So thinking about like the connection between. Like it's about like the distance in that moment is almost collapsed, right? So it doesn't matter that we're not in the physical space visiting the shrine of the imam, but reciting the ziyarah in a way is also a way to like bring nearness to the sacred.
Beautiful.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So then like this like kind of opens the door to like another question, right? Because we go for Umrah and we go for Hajj and so on, and you go to Medina and you have the imams of Baqi like are buried. And I hear this all the time. People say like, I don't feel like connected because like where's the shrine and where's the dome and where's the thing, and like and then on the flip side we have another problem that like you walk into like some of these shrines and you have like people taking selfies like in front of the shrine and sort of
everybody's done it. You don't have to be
I'm just saying, and so like what is it that the actual like decor means, and should it mean like anything in the first place? And then the lack of like why do you think, and I have my own like suppositions, but like why do you think that creates a barrier between someone's connectivity when we just said that the physical doesn't matter, but now all of a sudden the gold and the jewels and the mausoleum all of a sudden now mean something?
Yeah, I think listen, we are like I think emotions. There's a lot of historians that have worked on like affect and senses, because at the end of the day, we are people who are moved by our senses also, like like affect matters to us. So like the sound of being in a space, the visuals of being in a space, right? Like I do think that helps for people identify in their mind that this is the sacred, right? I'm going to get to the thing about architecture because I think that is an important question. But it's the same question I would ask people about a majlis, an ICNYU majlis, for example, right?
Sure.
Like, so obviously it's in a room that doesn't look like Najaf, right? Or Karbala, or
or your local mosque in New Jersey.
Oh yeah, or that too.
One of them, one of the 15.
Yeah, one of them. So it doesn't look like that, but would you consider it during a majlis a sacred space? This is just like a general yes, no. I mean, you can say no. I mean, this is not like you don't have to, agree with everything we're saying. But, I think there's so there's something experiential, right, that makes a place sacred. And so it doesn't, architecture doesn't mean everything, right? But there are other aspects to it, right? Like Kari Zohair read so beautifully the Quran. We believe that even the recitation and hearing the recitation of the holy word creates a sacred atmosphere, right? So that's like, it symbolizes moving into the sacred. And then when the majlis is done and everyone's eating, like maybe we've moved out of the sacred, right? So we move in and out of this mindset.
Dynamic.
It's a dynamic thing, yeah, right? So I think that's why when historians say, like, I think a lot of people, when you just think about sacred space, you think of as a place inherently has sacredness, right? Like, this place is sacred. And what you actually realize, I think, when you are talking about sacred space is that there are things that make it sacred, right? And your engagement with it is like making it sacred as well. I do think that there is a historical reason why, especially in the Shia tradition, that we have come to associate sacred space as, a golden dome and the blue kind of Safavid architecture. And that is very much a product of historical circumstances, right? So like after the 1500s, the rise of the Safavid Empire, they really patronized shrines and they spent a lot of money. And there's an excellent book by Kishfer Rizvi about sort of creating a visual symbol of what a Shia space is, right? And that in some ways, in a lot of our minds, like if you see a shrine, you can almost identify it as quote unquote Shia space by how it looks. Right. And it becomes like a validation. This space is for me, and it's sacred, and it's Shia, right? Like it's authentic. And so I think even like a place like the Sayeda Zaynab shrine has that, even though people will say, well, okay, maybe she's not really buried there. But it has that like architectural representation of like, this is an important space. And I think that there is something about how we've been conditioned to think about like what a Muslim or Islamic space looks like, that makes us feel more connected when we enter this grand space than, if we are in Baqi, right? And you're kind of, you don't see a tomb, right? And yet at the same time, if we are to believe in that imams inherently carry barakah, right? Like they're vessels of divine light, then, I mean, that is sacred space, right? But I think people have a different emotional connection to that. I think we've also, in the Shia tradition, I mean, we emphasize ziyarah a lot, and that to us has come to mean Karbala and Najaf. And so I think there's like multiple reasons why people feel that sort of sense of connection. Like if you look at this picture, everyone's like, oh, I know what that is. That's a shrine, and that's sacred. But if I showed you an open field, it might not evoke the same thing.
Yeah. From like my like faith leader thinking hat for like a second, though, of course, in the ideal, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hopefully, that there's a day that I am able to witness where there's tombs, and Muslims erect like over the Imams of Ahlul Bayt al-Baqi, and there's no negotiation. I'm not at all trying to say the other, but it becomes also like a sense of responsibility sometimes that I feel that I assume to cultivate the sort of connectivity to that ziyarah, though there may be this physical manifestation of blue, nice, turquoise tiles and a golden dome erect over it, because it's about the vessel of light that takes us back to the Prophet, who takes us back to God, and that is in like the Imams of Baqi. And I think that, I guess it's almost sad or it's heartbreaking to me that it requires so much more effort, for me to get people connected when they're performing that pilgrimage. And even to like an extent for myself, and for me, maybe it's because there's people pushing us and shoving us and telling us to move this way or that way. But the fact that someone does not resonate like with being in that sacred space, or does not treat it with the same due respect. When I get to Najaf and I have 100 people in my group, they're all ready like with wudu and with ghusl and with their prayer beads, and they're ready to like pray in their worship. And when they go to Medina, like you go to, well, of course, when they go to the grave of the Prophet, there's that same sort of fervor. But when you go to the grave of Baqi, there's not that concept, because it's like, well, I just walk through like a graveyard, but it's like you're not walking through a graveyard, you're walking in the company of the best of creation and the vessels of, perpetual light.
And more of them than you are anywhere else, right?
Course,
So, I do. I think that there is. I think for a lot of, I mean, there are political factors involved.
Sure,
There are so many
sure.
reasons why I think for Shia ziyara, especially to like Iraq and Iran, have come to feel like you're reinforcing the sense of identity.
Sense of belonging.
Yeah,
You're
like
with
a sense
people
of
who are
belonging.
like you,
And so
yeah.
people, like, it has become so important. And then there's something unifying about that experience,
no
right?
doubt.
And then there is also that visual, like, awe. People walk into, I mean, there's like a grandeur, right, to these shrines. There's no doubt about it. And I think that you're exactly right, right? Like, there is this disconnect people feel. And I guess, the question to ask ourselves is, like, if somebody built a tomb on top of that, would you feel more connected? Like, if you saw a gold dome on top of Bucky, would that make you feel more emotional about it? Would you feel like it's more sacred?
Or would you want to go? 'Cause
Would
the
you
people
want to
who
go
don't want
more,
to go,
you know? And then also, I think, I mean, there's so many, like, architecture is also political. I think most people, right? Like, how things look, like how you build is a very political statement, and how things look. And so, I think everybody wants, there's this rebuilds Bucky thing, and I think it's incredibly valuable for us, right? It's
Sure.
heartbreaking to see these kind of raised rocks for us, but at the same time, is the only thing that people want to see a Karbala-like structure in Baqi, and like that is sacred space. Like, what would you want it to, what would it be acceptable to look like for everybody? Like, because we feel like, okay, these are Shia imams, so like, does it have to look like that?
Like Safavid architecture.
Exactly, which is it is Iranian Safavid, like Timurid architecture, right?
I think a lot of folks would also resonate then with the fact that, like, just like you spoke to before, in like the Muharram like Majlis program, people always like comment, they're like, Sheikh, why don't you put up some iconography like a big Yah Hussein flag? And I say, like, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And they're like, how come we don't eat like dal and like
right.
like on Ashura Day or during Muharram? No, I mean, people ask this thing, or how come we don't eat qima if you're like Iraqi? Like, why don't we serve these foods? And people bring them and they serve them, and hey, perks of my job is I always get
great.
I always
like,
get
it's
extra
fun.
desserts and food. Thank you, Auntie, for the I appreciate it.
I'd like to share something.
Yeah.
No food, but a thought. So Noor Zaidi and myself had, Alhamdulillah, we were blessed to go on a pilgrimage together, and she had a conference in Iraq, so I went with her, and then we went for Umrah, and it was just two of us. So Alhamdulillah, Najaf, Karbala, Karmel, we did all the ziyarah, and from Najaf we flew to Medina. And when we arrived there next day, we went to Masjid Nabi, and we went there, and of course all the grandeur and whatever we prayed, and then we walked to Baqi, and we walked, and there's all these construction obstructions there. We are walking around, and there was nowhere to see, and she was very young. She is young, being younger, more emotional. I was, but
I'm young and still.
I have seen that all my life, just like that.
Yeah.
So we were walking, we walked around, and then she said, Mama, kya kare? Because there was nothing that we could see. And then I saw this young guy, and there was this young Pathan, and there was someone with him, two of them, and he had this bench. On top of that bench, he had put some rocks, and he had climbed over, and he was looking over the wall. And I knew, I could feel that he was at the right spot, and he was taking pictures. So मैंने उसकी तरफ देख के कहा, मैंने कहा बेटा, मैंने कहा आप क्या देख रहे हैं? So he got so scared because the surveillance there.
Sure.
And I said, कोई बात नहीं है, मैं भी यही देखने आई हूँ, आप क्या देख रहे हैं? मैंने कहा कुछ दिख रहा है? तो he had I think he had the
Photo.
the graves in
Yeah,
view,
yeah.
and he was looking. तो मैंने कहा मेरे phone से भी आप तस्वीर ले लीजिए. So he took my phone and he took all the pictures. We could see them, and then I took my phone from him, and there was a bench there. And Noor said, "What should we do now? बस चल." I said, "बैठ जाओ यहाँ." I said, "बैठो यहाँ. यहाँ तुम्हारी बीबी है." I said, "Sit and talk to her." I said, "Noor, the main purpose क्या होता है? पुरसा देने का. We are not here like you're not going on a vacation. It's not about seeing. It's the feeling." And I said, "बीबी यहाँ हैं और यहाँ बैठकर उनको पुरसा दो." And it was also a stark comparison to Najaf and Karbala, all that we had seen there. And then I can tell you that one time I actually connected with Baqi and my Bibi the way I had never done before. and it was just the two of us sitting on a bench there. And मैंने कहा, and she was crying and I was crying, and I said, बस पुरसा दो नूर, यही करने आए ना. So we just sat there, and that connection, I felt there was nothing to see.
Sure.
But this is sacred. These are the
Yeah,
spaces.
absolutely. Yeah.
And it's so somewhere in between, somewhere I'm not being judgmental.
No.
I'm not. But it's just my feeling that somewhere along the way, making everything, creating everything, recreating, building, sparkling, and we are not so focused on the feeling now. It's about मैंने ये कर लिया, what happens. So I just felt such a strong connection. Of course, everybody wants it built. We want first thing is that we want us to have it,
Yeah.
Like we feel we have Karbala, we have Najaf, but it would be nice to see. But I think we can still feel.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
was a lot of feeling for the two of us when we sat.
Sure,
there.
yeah.
And I will just say that I'm going to make my plug for people to go on Umrah to
Yeah,
go with Sheikh
sure.
Faiyaz, because I
want
think
to, and for talking about connectivity, we also sat in front of I had never ever been away from home on Shab-e Barat. My Shab-e Barat has always been at home in my own house. I never leave. I pray. This is the first time in my life I was away, and we were sitting in front of the Kaaba.
Yeah,
The two of
alhamdulillah.
us, and alhamdulillah, it didn't matter whether there were 10,000 people there, 15,000. When you connect.
Well, I think that's what we're aspiring toward, right? So, like, even when we talk about
Yeah.
these spaces and their lack of iconography or lack of physical touch or feel, again, like I was saying before that, somebody would question, and I've had dozens of people who say that I don't come to like your majlis at the university.
you don't have
because
an alum, maybe.
It doesn't feel like a majlis.
Yeah,
So
right.
what feels like a majlis to you?
Yeah.
The food is not right because you serve Thai food, for instance.
Yeah.
The people are not right because there's too much diversity.
Yeah.
Your majlis is in English and Masab is supposed to be in Urdu or in Arabic.
Supposed to be,
or
right,
Na'i,
yeah, yeah.
Right? Or it's supposed to be in Dari, or it's supposed to be in whatever,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Or and the most popular one is always this one, like, where's the Adam, right?
Right.
Like, where's everything? It doesn't feel the same way. So again, like, from like my faith-based hat, like, it feels, I mean, it's incredibly tragic that
Yeah.
that conversation is something that is consistently have to be had, because it's all of it, like, an individual sort of conception of a spirituality, because you said it's something very, very personal, or the sacred is something very, very personal. Now all of a sudden why does it need to be exported, or why do people have this feeling that it also needs to be sort of this way or that way?
Right, I mean,
we
I
need
think-
to make majlis great again in
Yeah.
that perception, right?
We're trying so hard not to get into trouble.
I am
This
trying
whole thing,
my
we're,
best.
like, trying.
We're in a group of friends.
Yeah,
No
it's
one's
all
gonna do anything
friends.
to
So
me
yeah,
here, so.
I think we have this everybody through. I mean, we talked about this yesterday a little, but this
Yeah.
idea of like what's unauthentic, like what's a
Yes.
real majlis. And I really wonder where that comes from, because like if you ask me as a historian, like what is authentic commemoration of Karbala, I would tell you I don't know. I don't have that answer. Like the word, like the true or authentic or like the way it's supposed to be, doesn't have meaning as a historian of religion, right? Because then I would ask you, okay, so is the correct way of observing a majlis the way the fourth imam did in Medina? Or is it how the sixth imam did in Medina? Or maybe the 10th imam in Samarra?
In private.
In private, right? Which they would have done in very different ways, right? Or is the correct way to have a majlis gathering and the correct way to observe Karbala how, I don't know, Sheikh Tusi did it, right? In Najaf, or in the 15th century, like I'm throwing out these big names, but like Muhammad Baqir al-Majlisi, who was like one of these big figures, right? Who lived under the Safavids, who probably would have conducted it in Farsi, whereas everybody else was doing it in Arabic.
Very different than Mufid in Baghdad.
Very different, right? And in different, or it would have been different in the 8th century in Kufa, where, Najm Haider has written this really good book about the Shias of Kufa. So like, what would you, so every one of those things is different, right? But we all think, I mean, I'm sure most people would say yeah, like the way that they did it in Iran in the 1500s or the 1600s is more authentic, no offense, than like NYU. You know, people have that thing, right? People will say like,
Don't get offended very quickly anymore.
but I don't really know why, you know, we have this desire to constantly, I think, bludgeon each other with like, this is authentic and this is like the right or wrong way to do it. And I think most of the times when people are saying that, they're just saying, what they're trying to say is that this is just different. Like, this is different for me. And, you know, I would say that throughout history, because that's what I study, right? Like, people have had, our scholars have debated what is an appropriate, not right? But like, what is an appropriate form of commemoration in a particular space in a particular moment?
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know that any of them would say that you have to have a banner or an alam to make a space sacred. I think it's perfectly fine if people want to feel that connection, right? I mean, you know, we do also think that there is some baraka from touch, right? Like from these, right? So you go to when you go for a ziyarah, you know, there is something tactile about like touching the ziyarah, right? The zari, and everybody wants to do it, and we think that there's like a transference of baraka. But you know, I think our actual leading scholars would say like, you don't actually have to physically do that, right? That like being in the space, right, has a sacredness. There are so many other ways that you can, you know, like have that transference of baraka and ziyarah. So we've really made these things and sacredness about like physical objects or how something looks or architecture, when I think that there are a lot of other things that kind of.
I have these photos as well.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Yes. So we can get to that. But
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question that I would ask all of you, you know, like, for anybody who thinks the Sayeda Zaynab shrine is an important place, right? And, you know, I've thought, like, that's an incredibly meaningful shrine. If I said to you, like, she's not buried there, would it make it less sacred? What? Yes? Anybody? Yes. Yes. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it wouldn't make it any less sacred. Like you mentioned, there's different factors that define sacred.
Right.
So whether I know or not, I don't think personally it would make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Just to take another viewpoint, I think it would, right?
Yeah.
Like if I know that she's not buried there, then it's different now. It won't hit the same like feeling that I had when I knew that she was there. It doesn't mean that it's not sacred anymore as like a place.
Mm-hmm.
If I now know that there's like some, you know, scholar who says like, oh, this other place is actually like, I would want to go there now. Like, you know, like it would matter to me.
Yeah.
But I still think that both have like something to you.
Right. Yeah.
So I remember when we went on ziyarah and Sheikh Faiyaz, when we were in Canada, like people would ask you, do we pray qasr here, do we not? And I remember you saying that there's like this opinion where if you're like within like a certain distance of the body of Imam Hussein, it's like, oh, you don't have to do qasr. So there's clearly a significance.
Absolutely.
Right? So if the body is there, then there's a sacredness to it, right?
Right.
So I would assume that would extend, you know, maybe to a lesser extent to other historical figures. So I would say it would be less.
Yeah. Some.
I kind of want to come back to what we were doing at the beginning, where we were talking about what was sacred to us, because there was no structure or form in it. It was the experience,
Right.
And it was also
Very
a
nice.
shared experience.
Yep.
And so, what kind of is coming together right now as you guys are talking is the fact that, like for Baqi, there's only a small number of us who have the shared experience of Baqi, and the people around you at that moment when you're in front of Baqi are not sharing that experience with you.
Yeah.
That causes the sort of cognitive dissonance of, this is so sacred to me, but nobody else notices, and there's a wall in front of me, and
Right.
I'm being prevented from experiencing. And that's sort of like, you know, when you're praying at the airport and there's people like in the terminal praying versus like, why don't you go to the prayer room so you can kind of
Yeah.
have that feeling and not have the stares of all these people on you. And it feels different, right? Because you're kind of have a fear. It's the same thing in Saudi. You have that fear. Somebody's going to see you doing something that you see as sacred, but they do not, and they might actually attack you for it. And I guess maybe that's where Syria kind of comes into play there as well, where we do have a greater community and social buy-in of that place, and if it does change
yeah, I think it would change, right? If people
Yeah.
suddenly come to this collective belief that she is not there, then it would change. It's sort of the same thing with like the shrine of the head of Imam Hussein that's in Egypt. There's a lot of really good reports that it's there.
Yeah.
And my brother went there. He said he felt it, but we don't go as a community, and so that place is somehow less sacred.
Yep. And there's a Bibi Zaynab shrine in Cairo as well, right? Which people, some of our Shia scholars have visited. So, I think that it's like, is it like degrees of sacred maybe that people feel about like?
I do think it's 100% communal.
Yeah.
It's even though we're supposed to be connecting with God and connecting on a spiritual level, Islam is a communal religion.
Right.
We are taught that we are connected through our community to Allah, like serving each other and being together.
And to talk this back for a second, I think there's a difference also, and sorry, I know you have your hand raised, I'll get right to you in 2 seconds. Like there's a difference between like what is like legal and then what is sacred. So like Dr. Hadi, like your question about the permissibility of qasr prayers, and yeah, absolutely, there is this legal opinion that someone can pray, full prayers, or they should be praying full prayers, or it's recommended to, or even it's permissible to. When you're a certain distance from the great Imam Hussein, and other of our fuqaha, they extend it to the shrines of any one of the Prophet or the Imams, not to say the Zaynab, but to to the Baqi and to the Prophet and to any of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, and others would even extend it to the city, right? To the city. So anything that's called Najaf, anything that's called Kadamiyya, it suffices, or anything that's called Medina, even the extensions of. But I think that question is secondary, or that is not secondary. That's an aside from this question of sacred. So I'm with you in that. Unfortunately, I wear like a legal hat all the time too, just because of my work and my background and my study. So I'm always thinking, you were saying like, what do scholars say about this? And in my mind, I was like, they only talk about permissibility. What is halal and haram about the ritual, right? So like, can we, So anyway, so there are two conversations, I think, right? We can attach sacred to something that is not legally sort of bound by any law, right? So Sayeda Zaynab, or let's leave Sayeda Zaynab front, because there is also opinions that say that Sayeda Zaynab is buried in the mosque. But say the Ruqayya shrine, right, which is just a 20-minute car ride away. For those of you who have been, there is nothing that is truly substantive that suggests that she is buried there.
Yeah.
I believe that, if I was there, I would go to visit her, by the way, right? Just in the case that she may be.
Right.
But we have no real firm evidence to say it, right? That being said, everyone within the collective Shi'i community has attached something sacred about that location and that place, and because there might be a possibility, but there's no legal implication, right? So my intention now, all of a sudden, from the legal lens, is like, wow, I'm drawing closer to Allah, because I'm drawing closer to my love of the Prophet and his family by praying in 2 rak'ah prayers in this location.
Right.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save our communities and our shrines in Syria.
Right.
Sorry.
So, and I'll just say, like, that's why that article. But that's why that article was. It's called. You may not like it. It's called "Invented Pieties" by Yasser Tababer. Like, what makes a Shia shrine sacred is because it really became a shrine in the 1980s, and it was discovered. And now I think there's such like tremendous. I don't know, like people saw with the with the takeover of the government in December, and there was all these videos of jihadi fighters in the shrine or around the shrine, and there was like this tremendous. There's this really emotional fear, right? Like people have this emotional fear of like what's going to happen to our shrines, these sacred spaces that like have these people who intend violence to them. And if I said to you like, okay, but like we really only started going in there in the 1980s, and as from a scholarly opinion, I cannot point you to one that says she is 100% buried.
But it's
there.
the symbolism.
But it's the symbolism.
If someone
right?
were to come and say you can't pray in the Islamic Center prayer room anymore on the 4th floor, there's some connection that you have. The amount of prayers that I had, Laylatul Qadr, and we did Majlis, and I cried there, and I did this, and whatever, right? All of these things.
And
some of you got married there, I don't know, right?
Like, Go ahead, sorry.
first heard that from Dr. Najm, I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy. Like, you know, I can't believe that there's things that, you know, aren't totally confirmed. It's sort of shocking when you first hear that. But then I thought about it more, and I realized that, you know, the fact is that there's this underlying principle that that sort of had, you know, an impact throughout all of this. And really, that principle of Imam Hussein rising up for justice against an oppressor, against a tyrant, of him sort of taking his family to Karbala, even if we don't know the entirety of the details and can confirm everything that happened, just the fact that principle exists and he did what he did and was really that savior of Islam at that point, that in itself, it validates and gives us sort of that yaqeen that, you know, we are on the right path, and that's why this is sacred. So going back to this example, of, you know, for example, Bibi Zaynab not being buried in this shrine, just the possibility of her being there, we should have enough marifa and sort of recognition that she may be there, that gives us enough of a reason to go there and mourn her and to remember her, because that principle there at the end of the day is that, you know, we are remembering God, we are instilling that ish of Ahlul Bayt, that love for Ahlul Bayt, and really it's that principle that should drive us to go through all these different things that you guys mentioned. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think, you know, the thing that's fascinating to me about the shrine, and I will like say myself, even knowing all of this, like I feel a tremendous emotional connection to the shrine, right? I have felt that for many years. It's been devastating to have, you know, all of the events that have been going on. But I also know that as a historian, and I didn't send this picture, but if you look at, this is kind of actually the thing that has driven me through a lot of this project. If you look at how the Sayeda Zaynab shrine looked like in the 1950s, it's like a hut. Like it's really, really just like a mud and that's not that long ago, right? Like in the 1950s, we're talking, you know, like Najaf, Karbala, all of these shrines are like already in their kind of massive, expansive form. You have groups going for pilgrimage. I mean, this is very, very recent. And people just weren't really visiting the shrine that much. And it didn't have any of that kind of like the architectural grandeur. And so what you think of as the shrine now is actually such a recent phenomenon. And so I think I'm also interested in like, why and when do people decide that this place has so much meaning that, you know, it may be sacred, right? It could have been like the sacred out there that people weren't visiting. But there is a period of time that we can actually trace where we say like, all of a sudden it became incredibly important, right? And that community affirmation in some ways made that sacred. And I don't want to say like she said, there's plenty of scholars who say like our best guess is that she is actually buried there, right? But there are some people who believe she's in Medina. There are some actually who say like, okay, well maybe it could. Most Shias don't believe that she's buried in Cairo, but there are one or two who say like there could be something to that as well. And those are places that are worthy of respect, So some Shia scholars have visited those shrines in Cairo, and there is something about the shrine, right? That like it has this sense of the sacred that even our scholars would go there and say, that these are places of respect.
And barakah, right?
And barakah, exactly.
Their remembrance suffices as a place of blessing.
Absolutely.
And I know we want to get to these photos and maybe open up for conversation.
Yeah, so I'm just going to say really quickly, and then so this is the other shrine that I've worked on. It's, some of you might have heard me talk about this, a shrine in Lahore called Bibi Pak Daman, and it's supposedly to another daughter of Imam Ali, Ruqayya bint Ali, who was married to Muslim Naqil. And so the narrative is that, she's a sister of Imam Hussein and a sister of Bibi Zaynab. And, the story about this shrine is that after Karbala, she traveled to Lahore and she was buried there. And this is a place of, a lot of visitation, a lot of prayers, a lot of rituals. And so I've been working on this shrine for many, many years. And the number one question I get from people is like, is it true? Is she really buried there as if, like in this? And I haven't found like the piece of paper that says in, Sanskrit or whatever, here lies Ruqayya bint Ali, and I'm not sure anybody will ever find that, right? So, this is a prime example of everybody wants me to answer the question, is it true? Is she buried there? And my answer as a historian, like looking at the shrine for so many years, is like all these people can testify that this is a place of ritual, of barakah, right? Where mourning happens there, commemoration happens there. It is sacred space for them. And people also testify to feeling tremendous spirituality, right? They're miracles. They have felt their prayers answered there. And so, for me as a historian, I'm like, I would say this is sacred space. And you know, some people say to me, well, if there's nothing there, if she's not there, what is this? This is not a shrine. Like, what is this space? And I think other people would answer, like, there's still something sacred about this spot. But going to the question of architecture, so this is what the shrine looked like, you know, for decades. And then there was all these legal debates about rebuilding and renovating and expanding the shrine. And Shia groups, because they want to sort of affirm that this is Ruqayya bint Ali, submitted a plan. Can I?
Yeah,
go for it.
Yeah.
Submitted a plan for the shrine to be rebuilt like this.
Looks like Mashhad.
Yeah. And so, first of all, like, if you've ever been there, it's so small. The area is small. I don't know where you're building, and they called it like the Mega Shrine Project, so, which is really a tell. But, you know, they wanted the domes and the gold, you know, like, it just, like, if you look at it, it sort of, like, has this visual cue of, we are Shia, this is Shia, which comes from, like, a very Safa.
Can you guys bury me in Washington Square Park?
And it will be sacred, because it is a I'm going to get in trouble. But, you know.
I need to keep my mouth shut.
Yeah. So, you know, I think that there is, you know, they were like really sort of committed to this like shrine being like, this is how we validate that this is a Shia sacred space by building a shrine that looks like that. And that will make people want to come more. Which I think tells us something, you know, what we were saying is like people feel this connection to these spaces, and they ultimately, somebody else's Instagram account can play, but so they did a renovation.
Is that yours?
I don't know if
Did
it'll
you
play.
put this here? Let's try.
I did. So they did a renovation that looks nothing like the mega thing, but it's still, you know, it's a lovely shrine, and they kind of the architect said that we wanted to pay tribute to the Mughal heritage of Lahore. So they built a dome, but it looks a little bit different, and a lot of Shia groups are like really upset because it doesn't look Shia. But it does have the zari. My mom is like, I need to say something.
Isn't it because the Iranians, that plan?
Yes, so that plan was supported in part by the Iranians. So they kind of compromised, like they have the zari, they have all of that, but it doesn't look like a prototypical Shia shrine. And, you know, so I guess this, like for me, this is such an interesting space, right? Because first of all, it's a question of like, who is there? Is there anybody there? Does it matter? And does how it look make it more or less sacred for us as Shias?
Fascinating.
Yeah, so I'm going to leave at that.
Yeah, fascinating. We have questions. Yeah, go for it.
When was that?
Which one?
The rebuild of
It's done now. It's been like the last year and a half.
because I was gonna say I went like 3 years.
Yeah, and it was yeah, exactly. So it reopened, I think, at the beginning of the year. Yeah, beginning of the year, end of last year. So if you go now, it looks like this. But it's very recent. It's all over the news and on social media because it's this, you know, renovated shrine. And, you know, it kind of also has ignited the debate of, like, who is actually buried there. And, you know, Iran, because I think people like validation.
Of course.
So, you know, they went to Iran, and Iran sort of said, well, like, we can't prove that she's buried anywhere else because we don't know where she's buried,
Right.
and she's probably buried somewhere, and like it makes sense. And so they sort of like gave it their like, we'll give you money for this shrine to make it look like this.
Yeah.
And so, you know, like I guess they were willing